Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining myself, Michael McKean, CDI Computers, and Bobby McDonald, founder and CEO of Parlay. For those of you that aren't familiar with CDI Computers, just a brief intro. We've been helping schools across North America for over 2 decades, and we do so by deploying and supporting classroom-ready technologies that connect students to the world. We've worked with over 10,000 schools on a wide variety of technology projects, small and simple to complex and very large rollouts. We're passionate about enabling learning experiences where kids feel confident about their future. So a small briefing on why CDI decided to partnership with Parlay. Quite simply, we fell in love with Parlay because it bridges the gap between pedagogy and technology. And CDI shares Parlay's value of fostering inclusivity in the classroom where every student will have a voice. So Parlay is intuitive and provides useful data to educators while enabling meaningful discussions. So students that have used Parlay are more engaged, teachers are seeing immediate buy-in from them, and everybody wins. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Bobby. Bobby?
Mike, thank you very much. Thanks for the quick introduction. Thanks everyone for taking the time today to take time out of your busy schedules to learn more about Parlay. I'm really excited to talk through some of the underlying pedagogy behind Parlay, as well as doing a walkthrough of the application itself. So you'll see on the screen here, it says Parlay Class Discussions for a Better Tomorrow. We're a very mission-driven company, and this is the mission that we're trying to achieve. So just before I get into the presentation, I did want to quickly talk about a little bit more about the relationship between CDI and Parlay. So at Parlay, we're big champions of class discussions, as you'll see when we go through this presentation. Class discussions is something that we care very much about. It's the sort of bread and butter of what we do. And CDI, of course, in a whole number of ways, has been working with schools to deploy classroom technologies for over 20 years. And so when we think about Parlay in the classroom and our relationship with CDI, we think about it as the integration between these two things. And we think about it, all of the many customers that CDI has around North America who have successfully gone to one-to-one rollouts with their classrooms, having Chromebooks or other devices in their classrooms. Through the help of CDI, Parlay is a way to transform that classroom experience with your students, with your teachers, to really make discussions more meaningful, measurable, and inclusive. And we'll get into what that means. So I just wanted to use this as a quick frame to better understand how Parlay and CDI work together today and plan to continue to work together in the future. So with all that, we want to ask ourselves, why discussions? And there's 3 main reasons why we believe that discussions are a really important and ultimately underutilized tool in the classroom. The first one is that discussions drive student achievement, very simply. So for those of you who are familiar with visible learning, it's a massive study that was done by a researcher named John Hattie and a number of his colleagues. They studied 252 influences to understand what really drives student achievement. And what they did was over 1,200 meta-analyses, which incorporated over 60,000 studies from across the world, different methodologies, different timeframes, different locations, different grade levels, subjects, etc. And that incorporated ultimately over 300 million students. So it's a study of all the different studies. And what they really wanted to find out was what drives student achievement. What strategies at the classroom level, at the administrative level, at the school system level, and even at the home level really do impact learning outcomes in students. And so without getting into too much statistics, the way that they measured it was with a statistical analysis called Cohen's D-score. And what they found was, of the 252 influences, the average was a D-score of about 0.4. And that typically represented about 1 year's progress in the average classroom. So anything in their research, any of the different influences they studied that were below 0.4 meant slower than your average 1 year's progression, and anything above 0.4 meant faster than your sort of average 1 year progression. Discussion comes in at a 0.82 consistently across all of the, I think it's 5 iterations of the study that they've done over the last decade. And discussion is in the top 5% of all things that can be done in the classroom and beyond at the education level to drive student achievement and to influence and maximize the potential for impact. So it has over a double effect of what your typical classroom strategy would be. And I think something worth mentioning is that a lot of teachers and educators, generally speaking, really understand this intuitively. What's great about John Hattie's work is that he was able to really put a number to the fact that discussions move the needle when it comes to learning outcomes. And here's just for the records how discussion compares to some of the other sort of very common strategies that are used in the classroom. Things like reflections or feedback or peer tutoring, and you'll see even smaller class sizes all the way down there. So the Cohen's D-score of all these different strategies. And that's not to say that these aren't good things to do, that they don't have other ancillary benefits. And ultimately, as you'll see when we go into Parlay, that these things can't be done in concert with one another, but just to help provide a nice frame for the fact that discussion is really sort of an under-discussed, no pun intended, and an underutilized strategy in the classroom for driving student achievement. The next reason is that discussions teach future skills. So the graph here on the left, I apologize if it's a little hard to read, is a very interesting graph that actually came from The Economist. And what it shows is the work in the United States by type of work. And really they broke it down by cognitive and manual labor, and then ultimately routine and non-routine. And what you can see over the course from 1983 to I think 2014 or 15 when this study was published is that there's a dramatic rise in non-routine cognitive labor. What does that mean? It means there's a rise in the kinds of jobs that require that the employees or the people who are performing those jobs are able to adapt to changing circumstances, i.e. it's not routine, and that they're cognitive, so they require complex thinking and some of these 21st century skills that we all talk about. Now, of course, this is something that we talk about a lot. It's talked about a lot in the public sphere. It's talked about a lot in education, and it's something that educators know really well. And this is an example of one of the many lists that exist talking about what the skills of the future will be. And if we look at this list and we think about what a great academic discussion entails, at least 8 of these can come from a really meaningful, inclusive, structured academic discussion. So things like critical thinking and complex problem solving, people management, coordinating with others, developing emotional intelligence, all of these things can come from a really, really meaningful discussion. And so this is another reason why we believe that discussions are going to be or should be an integral part of the classroom experience going forward, because they teach the skills the students will need now and in the future. Finally, discussions encourage citizenship. In 1994, this is a really interesting research study that was done by Pew Research. In 1994, the sort of median views on a whole range of political issues between Democrats and Republicans overlapped quite a lot. The blue on here is Democrat, the red is Republican, and the overlap is that purple area. And this was 1994, and all you need to do is turn on the news today to realize that this is the world we're living in now. And the distance between the average political opinion has grown quite a bit. And this is playing out in real time on our television sets and on our smartphones. And of course, this is a very big challenge that I know especially educators think about a lot. And so discussions in our mind encourage citizenship. They teach us to share our views and to communicate effectively. But more importantly, they teach us to consider the perspectives and views of others and to ultimately empathize with and reflect on those different perspectives and to compromise and to find a balance, to find an opportunity to work together to solve big, complex, multi-dimensional problems. And if we're all doing this with a common commitment to the truth or a goal to uncovering the truth, then that's ultimately how democracies thrive and survive. And so at Parlay, we're pretty dead set in our belief that discussions really do encourage citizenship, and they do teach students these things. So without too much going into too much depth on that, or more depth on that, these are really the three things: the driving of student achievement, the teaching of future skills, and the encouragement of citizenship. These are why discussions are important to us, and these are why we believe that discussions can and should be an integral part of all classrooms going forward. With all that said, discussions are hard. We've spent the last 2.5 years working with teachers and students and instructional coaches from all over North America and even some internationally to learn more about what the major challenges were in the classroom when it comes to facilitating great discussions. And there are definitely some challenges. The first one is that discussions aren't inclusive by nature. Our experience and our research, and the research generally, shows that the average discussion has about 15 to 25% of the students in the class who dominate the whole conversation. And then the question becomes, is you have this great learning activity, this great learning experience that doesn't include or incorporate all students. And so the question becomes for us, how do we move the needle from going from 15 to 25% of kids that are engaging in that discussion to 100% of kids? So teachers who have been using our live and online roundtable, we've been doing some research this past fall, and we're looking at anywhere from 76, 77, all the way up to 100% in your average Parlay discussion. So we definitely are moving the needle on that, which is great because this is one of the biggest challenges for teachers in the classroom and when they're having structured, academic, meaningful discussions. The next thing is that discussions are hard to measure. This is a spider web discussion, or a Harkness table for those who are familiar. This is an example of a teacher tracking in real time student participation in discussions. This is probably one of the more sophisticated methods out there where the teachers are tracking all this by hand. But obviously, tracking anything by hand is error prone and it has its own limitations. The challenge with discussions ultimately is that they're not always measured. And if they're not always measured, they're difficult to assess, and they're difficult to put a grade behind. They're difficult to give meaningful feedback without that data. If you don't have any of those things, it's hard to incentivize students on a continuing basis to participate in these discussions and to act on what they're learning and to ultimately grow in these discussions. So what we want to do at Parlay is move from an environment that looks like this to one that looks like this. We have automated tracking of student engagement in the discussions. So we can see the relationships developing at the class level. We can see individual student participation, and we can see trending in that student engagement over time, which I will get into. And the final thing is that both teachers and students really vary in their comfort with and experience with participating in discussions. And so discussions aren't always as meaningful, as critical, and as rigorous as they could be as a result. Now, for some students, it's because they're shy or introverted, or maybe they just, they're not up to speed with the material. For some teachers who've been doing it a long time, discussions are easy. For other teachers who are new to discussions and or new to the classroom in general, and new to relinquishing some of that control from the sage on the stage approach to a more student-driven approach. For a lot of teachers, this is a new thing. So at Parlay, one of our major drivers is trying to get teachers from that, and students from that perspective of uncertainty and lack of familiarity, to a place where they feel confident and ultimately excited to participate in class discussions on a regular and recurring basis. So all that leads me to sort of our philosophy at Parlay. Everything we build at Parlay must move us closer to what we call meaningful, measurable, and inclusive discussions. When we build new features, we ask ourselves if we're going to move the needle on one, two, or all three of these things. When we create new content, we ask ourselves the same question. This is the filter ultimately through which we try to create amazing discussions, and we try to help teachers seamlessly integrate discussions into their classroom experience. So just really quick, I want to get into a demo, but meaningful discussions to us are ones that encourage the development of critical thinking and authentic communication skills. They're discussions that teach students to both give and receive constructive peer feedback, and finally, that to make school feel relevant and connected to the real world. Measurable discussions provide unique, reliable, and actionable insights into student engagement. They help students understand their own participation and how to improve. And finally, they save teachers time and effort when planning and assessing discussions. And then inclusive discussions, of course, every student has the opportunity to participate and is eager to contribute ideas. Students are comfortable and eager to engage one another. And ultimately, students are very positive and empathetic in their conversations. All right, let's move into a demo. I'm going to show you a quick run through of Parlay. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we work with schools and of course leave some time for Q&A. As I go through the demo, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat on the right-hand side in the Q&A panel, and I'd be more than happy to answer those as we go through the Q&A period. So how Parlay works. It works in three main modules or activities. One is the Parlay universe, where teachers can explore content that we've created and that is created by other teachers within the Parlay community. Step two is the online roundtable, which is an online discussion that helps students develop their reading and writing skills, their feedback skills, and really provides a great blended learning opportunity for teachers who are in school districts who are moving in that direction now that they have Chromebooks, et cetera. And finally, live roundtables is a live face-to-face class discussion where students are speaking to one another and listening to one another in real time in the classroom. And Parlay is used as a way to track and measure participation and ensure that every student has the opportunity to participate in a meaningful way. So with that, I'm going to exit out of the presentation here and just move into a quick demo. So what we're looking at here is the Parlay universe. So this is, again, that first step. So at Parlay, we create roundtables that directly connect the classroom to the events and ideas shaping our world. Again, part of that meaningful discussion component. And then we provide teachers with discussion questions and prompt material that is all ready for them to publish to their classroom. So if we look here, we have a whole number of different roundtables. So we have a set of our featured roundtables, which is sort of like our featured or favorite selection at current. Then we have a whole group of roundtables, for example, on the Sustainable Development Goals. We have roundtables on citizenship, so both digital and actual citizenship, if you will. We have a really great set of roundtables that we worked with the teacher in North Carolina to build called Heroes and Villains in U.S. History. Roundtables on motivation and decision-making. So lots of really different, interesting sort of quote-unquote real-world topics. So let's say I were to click into one. So for example, exploring the UN Sustainable Development Goals. As a teacher, I can explore this content. Now, generally speaking, these are made for students who are, let's say, grade 5 and up. Some of the content is a little bit more advanced. Other content is a little bit more introductory, and for a whole broad range of grade levels, teachers should know that what we provide here is a baseline, and they can edit and change anything that they see. So any adjustments or augmentations that teacher would want to make, they're free to do so. With that said, we're looking at a discussion topic here called Exploring the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the questions are, first, what are we discussing today? Why is it important or relevant? Always great to get student buy-in. Next, the content and multimedia. So this is where we go through the web and we find really great videos. In this case, it's a TED Talk, and different articles to support or help students learn the main concepts. Or oftentimes we'll do a compare and contrast where they can look at one article from one viewpoint and another article from a different viewpoint, really just to give them a sort of rich, holistic understanding of what we're about to discuss. And then we give them discussion questions. In the case of this roundtable, students are to pick one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we definitely want to give them choice where possible. And they have to talk about, and they have to pick one that they believe is the most interesting. And then they have to answer 3 questions in their own unique submission. And those questions are, 1, why do you believe this is the most interesting and or important Sustainable Development Goal? Then, doing their own research, they have to identify and explain 2 of the major roadblocks to achieving this goal. And then finally, they have to provide solutions to say, what can we do as individuals to help achieve this goal? And what about as a society? So these are questions that we've built right in. As I said, if teachers want to change these because they want to just sort of introduce the topic, maybe all 3 of these questions are a little too advanced. They have lots of opportunity to do so. And then finally, there are peer feedback instructions. So an integral part of Parlay's online roundtable, as you will see as we move into it, is going to be peer feedback and students building on and challenging each other's ideas by answering what we call guided peer feedback questions, which you will see. So let's say as a teacher, I'm browsing the Parlay universe and I love this roundtable, and we're doing this in our AP geography class, so I want to have this discussion. I very simply click create roundtable, and what it's going to do, it's going to take me into Parlay and ask me which one of my courses I want to publish this roundtable to. So I'm going to publish it to my demo class and press create roundtable. Boom, it has now published it to Parlay. I'm inside my Parlay classroom and I'm ready to edit this roundtable, manage the settings of the roundtable, and ultimately invite students. Just to orient us really quick, I'm inside of Parlay right now. I'm inside of my demo class, and I have all of my online roundtables here. I have all my live roundtables here for the class, which we'll get into. And then the one that I'm looking at is this exploring the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm just going to expand this out so we get that nice full screen view. And what I see here is the discussion prompt. And if you'll see here, there's an edit button. By the way, I'm a teacher and I'm Socrates. But if I want to edit this roundtable, I simply click edit here, and I have free reign to change, edit, augment, add my own pictures, videos, links, emojis if I feel so inclined. So I have lots of flexibility. And I should also add at this point that teachers don't have to use Parlay roundtables from the universe. They can, and often do, especially after they've had a few roundtables, integrate their own curriculum content into the discussion topic. So it is not a platform that requires you use the content we provide. It's just a great way to start, and at the very least makes it easy to try Parlay and to get some great discussions going quickly in your classroom. Again, the goal there is saving teachers time in making class discussions more exciting. So let's close this out. Let's say I wanted to invite my students now. I very simply come up here and press invite students. Now you'll see I have students in this class, so they're all checked off here. This is my class roster, and I can go ahead, I can invite students. If I don't have any students in the class at current, because it's my first roundtable, I can share this link with them. And in sharing this link with them, it'll ask them to join Parlay, which they can do with their Google or Microsoft single sign-on account. And it's automatically going to add them to the class. It's automatically going to add them to the discussion. And on their devices, they'll be right there in front of them, and they can start responding to the prompt. Additionally, we do have integrations with Google Classroom. So I can click this button and create an assignment directly in Google Classroom, pick the class that I want to assign it to, and the same thing with this link will appear, and the students can click the link from their Google Classroom, and it's going to redirect them to Parlay. So it's very easy to get students rostered and very easy to get them set up. And then for schools and school districts, ultimately, that sign on to use Parlay for the longer term, we are actually just finishing up our clever integrations to allow them to roster seamlessly through your student information system. So just a little bit of an administrative aside there. So I invite students to the discussion. Let's invite all these students. And now they've all been sent emails and they've all been invited to the discussion. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward into a roundtable that's in full swing, an online roundtable, so you can see what it looks like with some student data and some of the engagement that happens. So I'm going to flip over here. I'm going to go to a discussion that was had actually in a grade 5 class, of all things, about Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is an important pipeline dispute in Canada right now. And it was a really great discussion because it involves Indigenous relations in Canada, it involves politics, it involves business, it involves the environment. So there's intersection of lots of different disciplines. So it was a great conversation that one of the teachers that used Parlay had with their students. And so this is what we're going to look at today. I should add with the online roundtable that this could be done inside of a classroom. So this could be done a really quick online roundtable in a 15, 20 minute, hour-long session. It can also be done in that blended or online environment where students are taking a week or 2 weeks to contribute to the roundtable. And there's lots of different ways that teachers can and do use this tool in their classroom. So you'll see here the discussion prompt, which I can click to expand, that the students had submitted. And then you'll see all the different student submissions. So you'll see Simone de Beauvoir and Da Vinci and Michelangelo and Charles Babbage and Amelia Earhart. You'll notice that this is a pretty heavy-hitting class. These are all students from history. And that's because in Parlay, students get assigned what we call a secret identity for the discussion. If you want to turn this feature on, you can. It is on by default. And so all the students get assigned these people from history, and when they're interacting with one another, they're interacting with these characters or these secret identities. As a teacher, for obvious reasons, I can unsee the secret identities and actually see the individual students in the class. I see Oliver, Ivan, Daniel, Jake, Vihan, Mia, Miranda, Alex, etc. So I can see the students' real names. Students can't, but I can. It also makes the conversation a little fun as a teacher because you can sort of do a blind assessment or a blind read through of the conversation to see sort of objectively, if you will, evaluate student contributions. The secret identity really adds to that inclusivity piece. What we're starting to find in talking with students and getting their feedback about Parlay is that secret identity is one of their favorite things because it gives them the ability to put their ideas out there, even if they're not sure about them, even if they're, let's say, controversial, traditionally controversial ideas. Maybe they're not super secure with their language skills or abilities just yet. Parlay gives them the ability to really put their ideas out there and to create an open environment to challenge and build on each other's ideas while taking some of the existing social structure and expectations out of the class discussion. So as a teacher, you'll see I have Simone de Beauvoir, Leonardo da Vinci, etc. Let's say I wanted to click on Amelia Earhart's submission. So I could click on her submission and I can see her response to the discussion prompt. Now this one's simple text, but students can also incorporate videos and articles and links. So you can really teach them to almost be bloggers when they go to create their own submissions. After students submit their own unique response, as was discussed when we were looking at the prompt in the Parlay universe, they have to go and give each other peer feedback. So I'm going to click and load the comments here to Amelia Earhart's submission, and I can see Louis Pasteur, René Descartes commented on Amelia Earhart. But when students give each other feedback, it's not as simple as staring down a blank text box and saying, I agree or I disagree, or I like this or I didn't like this. Parlay provides them with what we call guided feedback questions. So provide a suggestion for improvement. Do you agree with this person's opinion? Why or why not? What do you like about this post? And then there's another example here of frame one. I believe blank could be improved by blank, and if you did blank, so you can do a bricks and mortar approach as well. And what students do, or what teachers do, excuse me, is they can go and edit these. So we have default ones that are in there to make it simple to get started, but depending on the nature of the conversation, depending on the nature of the subject, depending on the grade level, the kinds of engagement you are expecting from students, you can tailor these questions so that the feedback and the conversation that follows from the submission of these original ideas is more meaningful, is scaffolded, and you're going to get more sort of deeper levels of critical thought, and you're going to get students contributing in more meaningful ways. So I'm going to scroll back down to Amelia Earhart's post, and I can see what her peers said. But let's say I wanted to go deeper on Amelia's submission alone, or Amelia's contributions alone. I can actually flip over to the assessment tab. And what the assessment tab is going to do, it's going to bring me to a place where I can assess her based on her use of evidence, and in this case, bringing an interesting perspective to the table. I have a very simple scale, and then I have point details, so evidence and perspective. As a teacher, I can define the scale, I can define my point types and my criteria, and ultimately I can define what those point types mean for the students when they first join the discussion. So we're doing a really good job here of setting expectations early. When students first join, they know the criteria they're going to be evaluated against, and I have a way as a teacher to measure student contributions through a formative assessment, or if I really wanted to, I could make it a summative assessment as well. And so you'll see I also have an opportunity here to provide direct feedback to the student. But of course, we don't just want to assess and provide feedback to the student based on their original submission and or what their peers said. We want to dig a little deeper and find out what Amelia's contributions were above and beyond her initial response. So that's where we go into this summary of her contributions. So I can see she replied to Charles Babbage here. I can see she replied to René Descartes here. She replied to Cleopatra here, and here was her contributions. So I get an understanding of the quantity, quality, and diversity of her engagement above and beyond her initial response, and then I can give assessments and feedback on those grounds as well. So that is the whole student participation in the discussion. And finally, if I wanted to mark this discussion as a model response for the other students to see, I simply hit the star, and you'll see the stars appear here. Now, once this discussion is ended, this is where we get into the real goods of Parlay, which is the summary. So if I click View Summary as a teacher, I get really great data at the classroom level. So I can see the participation rate, how many students participated in this discussion. I can see how many students or what the main ideas were. So in this case, the indigenous population communities were a big part of it, the environment, oil, the pipeline itself, of course, government played a role. So all these different things are coming together, and I can see what the main ideas that came out of this were. I can see the model submissions. So students can see the summary too, so they can see what the best comments or submissions were, so we can talk about those, maybe bring this up on the board and show students or show teachers or show the students ultimately what great responses look like. We can see that there's an average of 2.21 comments per student, so that's pretty good, above and beyond their original submissions. And then we can see this graph, which shows all the different students get a color, and for each student, you can see the direction and volume of their comments. So how big it is, how much of the circumference each student takes up is how many comments they made. So for example, here, this is Jordan, and we can see from Jordan to Mia were 2 comments, and from Mia back to Jordan were no comments. So Jordan was commenting on Mia's stuff, but Mia did not respond to Jordan. We can see here is a different example. From Yuna to Jordan was 1, and from Jordan back to Yuna was another. You can see the relationships developing between students. This is one of the ways that Parlay works really hard to make sure that teachers have unique engagement data about individual students and at the classroom level, so they understand the conversation as best as possible. And based on that, they can, again, give feedback to the class and to the individual students. So that's a really quick summary of the online roundtable. I'm going to move into the live roundtable now, so you can see what happens in the sort of final phase of a Parlay discussion. In a perfect world, teachers would start with universe content. They would move their way into an online roundtable. And once this online roundtable was done, let's say over a week, as an example, then they would move into a live roundtable where the level of understanding is raised. Students all have grappled with the material. They've submitted their own ideas, so organized their thoughts. They've both given and received constructive peer feedback. And now they're ready to participate in a live face-to-face discussion. Just before I do move into that live roundtable, I did want to show this as a sort of sample or example setup, so teachers will be able to sort of visualize what this looks like. Classroom, everyone's sitting in a circle or some sort of other formation that lends itself well to discussion. And then the teacher has their computer open, and so do all the other students. And they're using Parlay to engage in the discussion. So I'll show you what that looks like. So from the teacher's perspective, I'm going to go into an online roundtable, or a live roundtable, excuse me, that's in full swing. So from a teacher's perspective, on the left-hand side here, I have the queue, which is all the students in the class, and students raise their digital hand to line up in the queue to get the opportunity to participate. I see here Ivan is the current speaker. Now as a teacher, I have Ivan on my screen, and I can, again, assign points that I define based on the criteria that matter to me, how I want to evaluate the students live in real time. So Ivan is literally speaking out loud, and the other kids are participating in the discussion. And as a teacher, this is a way for me to track and measure his participation in real time. I can use points. I can also leave notes for Ivan. These are notes that will be private to me, which I can subsequently share to Ivan later as well. So I'm going to flip over to the student view so you get an idea of what they're looking at. So I flipped over. I'm Alice right now. You can see up here, Alice, and we're in the live roundtable, and I can see that Ivan is speaking. So let's say I really like what Ivan's saying. Maybe I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give him some applause. Just a way to positively affirm that, he's making meaningful contributions to the discussion. Then, let's say I also wanted to build on what Ivan was saying. As a student, I would come here and I would say, I'd like to build on, and now I've joined the queue. And now, when Ivan's done, he'll tap out, and I will be next in line, and I'll get the opportunity to ultimately build on Ivan's idea. I also have my own notepad here that I can use to remind myself, okay, as the conversation is developing, maybe I want to develop some of my ideas here and refer back to them when it's my turn to speak. So what this queue system does is it gives students the opportunity, one, to be more deliberate about the kinds of contributions that they want to make. So I'm just going to unraise my hand here. You'll see I can question, challenge, and build on, and ultimately raise my hand. So I'm being more deliberate as a student to the kinds of contributions I want to make. So we're teaching students those fundamentals, those basic skills of what it means to be a meaningful participant in a discussion. And the queue system allows all students to get the opportunity to line up and have a turn to participate in the discussion. So you have those students who would normally dominate the conversation are now forced to relinquish space to the students that might maybe typically have a good idea, for example, but not really want to put their idea forward because those 2 or 3 kids that always dominate the conversation do so. Now they have the space, and the class gives them the space to do so. From the teacher's perspective, I can see here and I can manage the queue as necessary. So let's say Alice was 4th in line, but I wanted her to go next. I might just stop the class and say, okay, Alice, you're next. Guys, you're gonna have to wait because she really wants to build on Ivan's idea and we haven't heard from her today. So I click on Alice and boom. Now I can assign points to Alice. I can take notes based on what Alice's contributions are. And I can even see her notes in real time. So I can see what her main ideas are in real time as the conversation unfolds. Finally, if there's a student that's really quiet or not participating, for example, Mia here, I can go ahead and I can give her a quick nudge, and that's going to send a nudge to Mia and say, hey, I'd like you to participate. She can do something with it or not. That's totally up to her, but it's a way for you as a teacher to tell her that you'd like her to contribute. So this is a way to track and assess and evaluate the conversation in real time and give all students the opportunity to speak, and also teach them to be more meaningful with their contributions. So again, meaningful, measurable, inclusive. You can see very clearly how it's built into every single thing that we do. At the end of a live roundtable, you get some really awesome data. So I'm just going to go to this discussion on climate change that we had. And what we see is the number of speaking turns down here on the x-axis and the number of points received on the y-axis. And you come all the way up here and you can see Angela spoke 17 times and received 12 points. So she's quite engaged. As opposed to down here, we have Harpreet, who spoke 4 times and received 7 points. So still not bad, but maybe a little less engaged than the rest. And then I can see the class average as well. So you get a quick understanding of who's participating and whether or not it's quality, as assessed by you, the teacher. And then if I want to go, and let's say I think it was Angela, I can click on Angela, and I can see she spoke 17 times. She received 2 applauses from her peers. She raised her hand 9 times to introduce new ideas, and she built on people's ideas 8 times. She didn't question anyone. She didn't challenge anyone, and she did not take any notes during this activity. So if I go to my feedback and observations, maybe I can assign points based on this data. So I can assign evaluation based on meaningful data in the classroom, and I can give her feedback. So maybe the feedback would be like, hey, Angela, you're a great contributor. Next time, maybe ask a couple questions or challenge someone just 1 or 2 times to get the feel for that. So as a teacher, I can give that personalized private feedback to that student. And that's it. That's how the live roundtable works. Now, the idea with Parlay is that teachers, to the degree that it's, makes sense, are integrating this collaborative discussion, the feedback, the formative assessment, and all these peer feedback and the formative assessment and all these different components of that really do move the needle in terms of learning outcomes, in terms of student engagement, and they integrate them into the classroom over the course of the year. So that at the end of the term or semester or even the year, you could go and see a student report. So if I click on student reports, and let's say I go into Angela's profile, what I can do is I can see trending information. So I can see here's her contributions in online roundtables over time. So I can see, did she respond yes or no? How many comments did she make? How many points did she receive? And I can see how that changed over time. And you'll see this most recent one, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Obviously she hasn't contributed yet because we just created it. Then for the live roundtables, I can see the same stuff. So I can see her total engagement over time. And if I wanted to, let's say it was parent-teacher night, or I was sitting down with Angela and we were going through the discussion, her discussions over the course of the year, her engagement in the classroom, I can click on her current events journaling. So this was one roundtable that we did, and I can see all of her contributions. And then we move on to the next one. We did a live roundtable, and then another online roundtable. So we have that chronological list where we can see the student contributions over time, and we can give them feedback, and we can work with them to help improve as they develop these discussion skills, whether it's reading and writing in a more reflective online process or that face-to-face conversation. All right, so careful of time, want to leave some time for Q&A. So that is Parlay in a nutshell. That's how it works. And one last thing I'll say is Parlay is, our team is awesome at providing, or at gathering feedback and providing support. So at any time, any teacher who uses Parlay can click on this and talk to one of our teammates, and they will help you out, teach them how to use things, jump on, do a demo, answer questions, whatever the case may be. We also have a whole how-to and PD section, and then teachers can suggest new features right here in the app. So we're very, very good about communicating with teachers and students all the time. So that's a quick overview of Parlay. And then just before we move into Q&A, I did want to talk about how we work with schools and how we typically will get started with them. So this is a really sort of high-level overview. It starts with the 60-day pilot. So in that pilot, typically, we will train and empower ed tech coaches. So we'll work with them, give them product training, make sure they understand the ins and outs of the tool, help them find specific teachers that want to be a part of that pilot. We work together to set measurable objectives for the pilot and ultimately outcomes. And then we measure against those as the pilot goes on to make sure we are doing what we're setting out to do in this pilot. And then we have a dedicated instructional strategist, which is one of our teachers who will help you and your teachers make the most of Parlay, provide those reports as the pilot goes on. Then if you do want to continue with Parlay, there's a number of services that we offer. The first one is content creation. So we identify key teachers and or initiatives within the school, and we'll work with you with those teachers to create curriculum aligned roundtables. So we'll say, okay, here's our framework for creating great roundtables, for creating meaningful discussion questions, for bringing the real world into the classroom, work with teachers to understand what they're trying to achieve, and then ultimately create content for them to use Parlay in their own classroom in the event that, what exists in the universe now is not exactly what they want to be teaching. So we don't want them to waste time. We don't want them to not be able to get through the material that they need to get through. And we ultimately want to work with them to make sure that the content that's available on Parlay is world-class and comprehensive. Next is integrations and setup. So we will do single sign-on currently with Google and Microsoft. Clever is coming soon. And included in that Clever is rostering through through student information systems. And then finally, you get that district-wide usage analytics. Finally, there's also training and professional development. So we take a very pedagogy-first approach to this. It's a very interactive product experience, but we start like we did in this demonstration. We start with the why. We really get into the importance of collaborative discussions and peer feedback and some of the strategies, including using, verbs from Bloom's taxonomy and all that kind of stuff, how blended learning can work and why it's important to try, etc. We start there, and then we talk about how Parlay, the flexible tool, supports these initiatives. And then we do have flexible options for training and professional development. So those can be in person or online. And then finally, ongoing support. So I showed you the chat bubble. We're always supporting teachers, working with them, asking them to test out and try new features. There's that real-time chat. Happy to do follow-up training as the years progress. And then we do have regularly updated content. So without further ado, I think I'll open it up to Q&A. If anyone does have questions, feel free to enter them now. Maybe we can go through and see what some of the questions that came up actually were. So give me 1 second, pop those questions up. Okay, looks like there's no answered questions, or no open questions rather, but perhaps in the chat we may have some. So give me a sec. I'm gonna open up the chat. All right. Doesn't look like there are any questions. Mike, are you seeing questions on your end, or are they? Okay, that's great. So if anyone has questions and you didn't write it down, if you want to turn on your mic and answer or ask a question verbally, happy to answer that. All right, so if there are no other questions, my name is Bobby. You can send me an email here. You can visit us at parlayIdeas.com. If you'd like to try a pilot or have a few teachers try it at your school, we're happy to get that set up for you. And thank you, everyone, for attending. I appreciate you taking the time in your busy schedule, and have a great day.